Hannibal Lecter operated as a practicing psychiatrist in Baltimore for years, known publicly as the Chesapeake Ripper, before anyone connected the file cabinet of Baltimore's most respected doctor to a killer removing organs from his victims with surgical precision. He wasn't caught by a task force. He was caught almost accidentally by one FBI profiler, Will Graham, who only pieced it together because Lecter cut him during their final confrontation. And even that near miss cost Graham nearly everything, physically and psychologically. Once captured, Lecter spent years manipulated the very system meant to contain him and eventually escaped in a way that left multiple guards dead. Here's the part that should bother you. Every piece of evidence that eventually caught him existed years before Graham figured it out. Victim selection patterns, missing organs consistent with someone possessing anatomical training, a social circle of Baltimore's elite who had unknowingly eaten at his dinner table. So let's break down exactly how Batman and Sherlock would have closed this case years earlier, and more importantly, how they would have prevented the disaster that came after his capture. Part 1. The signature in the wound. Start with what actually killed people and how it was investigated. The Chesapeake Ripper's victims showed surgical removal of specific organs done with a precision that took investigators far too long to properly interpret. Standard homicide detectives read this as ritualistic mutilation. Sherlock Holmes would read it as a resume. The wounds weren't just clean. They were anatomically correct in a way that requires formal training, not improvised knowledge. Sherlock's method starts by narrowing the suspect pool the same way he'd narrow any specialized crime, cross-reference every licensed surgeon and physician in the Baltimore area against victim geography and time of death. This alone should shrink a metropolitan area's suspect list down to a manageable number within days, not years. Then there's the detail investigators badly underweighted for years. Several victims were, by multiple accounts, personally rude or discourteous individuals, a rude symphony conductor, a rude former patient. That's not randomness. That's a killer operating on a private code of judgment, which means he's choosing victims from people he's personally encountered socially or professionally. Sherlock builds a victim overlap map immediately. Who did these people have in common? Which restaurants, which social circles, which physicians? Batman's angle runs financial and social, not medical. A practicing psychiatrist with an expensive Baltimore townhouse, a taste for rare wine, opera memberships, and a habit of hosting elaborate dinner parties for the city's cultural elite is a man whose lifestyle should be cross-checked against his declared income the moment his name surfaces on any list connected to the victims. Gotham has taught Batman that men who function inside high society are rarely investigated with the same scrutiny as men on the margins, and that blind spot is exactly where killers like this hide. Cross-reference the surgical suspect list against the social victim overlap map, and Hannibal Lecter's name doesn't take years to surface. It takes one overlapping dinner party guest list. Part 2. The consultation trap. Here's where the real story made its worst mistake, and it happened after capture, not before. Once Lecter was already incarcerated at Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane, the FBI still needed his expertise to help profile an active killer, Buffalo Bill. That decision, using a captured predator as a consultant, gave Lecter something he should never have been given again. An audience, a rapport, and eventually leverage he used to manipulate his own transfer. Sherlock would never authorize that consultation in the first place. His method doesn't depend on interviews or rapport. It depends on physical evidence and deduction. Everything Lecter offered Clarice Starling during those sessions could have been derived independently by studying Buffalo Bill's crime scenes directly, geographic profiling, victim body type patterns, and the specific method of skin removal. Sherlock closes that entire loophole by simply never needing Lecter's voice in the investigation to begin with. Batman's containment philosophy closes the other half of the failure. In the real case, Lecter was allowed reading material, correspondence privileges, and contact with a corrupt facility director who mismanaged his custody so badly that another inmate was manipulated into suicide under Lecter's influence, without staff even realizing it happened. Batman's standard for containing a manipulator like this is absolute isolation from any tool that allows indirect influence. No unsupervised conversations, no personal items that could be weaponized, and no single point of human failure in the chain of custody. Because Lecter's entire skill set depends on finding exactly one person willing to bend a rule. Together, this closes both halves of the real failure. Sherlock never grants him usefulness. Batman never grants him opportunity. And a killer whose only real weapon was the trust of the people around him is left with nothing to work with. Part 3. The transfer that never happened. The most damning part of Lecter's real story isn't the murders, it's the escape. During a courthouse transfer, Lecter used a concealed handcuff key, killed 2 guards, and left the scene wearing the skinned face of one of them as a disguise, walking out through a hospital exit disguised as an injured officer. This wasn't genius. This was a transfer conducted with predictable timing, minimal redundancy, and staff who underestimated a man they had personally interacted with for years. Batman's protocol eliminates predictable transfer windows entirely. No fixed schedules, no reprieve routes, and never a single unarmed pair of guards moving a prisoner of this classification. Every transport would include redundant restraint checks performed by rotating personnel who have zero prior relationship with the prisoner, removing the exact psychological familiarity Lecter exploited every single time. Sherlock's contribution here is procedural paranoia. Assume every object given to a prisoner of this intelligence level can be repurposed. A pen, a paperclip, a restraint mechanism assumed secure. Search protocols built around the assumption of genius-level improvisation catch what standard protocols miss, because standard protocols are built for average prisoners, not for a man capable of turning a handcuff key into an escape plan years in the making. The result is simple. A killer identified before Will Graham ever gets hurt, contained without ever being granted a voice in an active investigation, and transferred using procedures that assume he is exactly as dangerous as his file says he is, not as harmless as his manners make him seem. Hannibal Lecter's entire career depended on one repeated mistake. People who should have known better kept trusting their own read of him over what the evidence actually said. Sherlock never gives him the chance to be read as harmless. Batman never gives him the chance to be underestimated. Between a mind that treats manners as irrelevant and a mind that assumes every captured predator will try to escape, Hannibal Lecter stops being an evolving legend and becomes exactly what he should have been treated as from his very first victim, a very intelligent, very containable problem.